Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Pro2 CMO podcast. I'm Bob Van Rossum with Market Pro, and we've got Bill Koleszar, one of my dear friends, and 3 or 4-time chief marketing officer. I've kind of lost track. And Bill, I'd love to just start with a little bit of an overview of your career and a little bit of a story of how you got started. What landed you in marketing?
Sure. Firstly, thanks for having me, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here, and my hope is that those that are watching garner insight to help them in their own careers. I'll tell you a little bit about mine. I was an undergrad at Florida State University. I was actually a finance major, and I took my very first marketing class. It was Marketing 101. It was a required class for me, and I had an adjunct professor that was an entrepreneur. He had a billboard company, and he was the person that essentially laid the foundation of my knowledge of marketing. And in addition to that, he lit a fire in me, and I'm not exactly sure what it was about him, but I realized after taking that class that I wanted to become a marketer. I literally changed my major from finance to marketing, and I would never look back. Fast forward a few years later, I realized going through grad school that I didn't want to just be a marketer. I wanted to be a marketing leader. I wanted to be a chief marketing officer. I wanted to take those two areas of knowledge, marketing and leadership, and put them together. And so I actually went back to school. There wasn't a roadmap. There wasn't a book I could get that said, this is the path to becoming a chief marketing officer. I went back to grad school a second time, part-time. I had the great fortune of finding a mentor that worked right alongside me as we did research around the role and leadership challenges of chief marketing officers. And in that effort, I interviewed dozens and dozens of CMOs and realized these were the critical skills. These are the things I need to work on. And that really put my career on a whole different path. To your point, I've been a chief marketing officer at multiple companies, everything from startups to private equity-backed firms and so on, and primarily in financial services and healthcare. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have had the experiences of that.
You said a couple really interesting things there that I just want to expand on. So you talked about having a mentor and having that mentor early in your career. And how did you find that mentor, and how valuable was that in you being able to learn quickly and get ahead of others who were in marketing, maybe at the same level with their career?
Yeah, such a great question. Interestingly, I talked about that mentor, Dr. Ken Bernhardt at Georgia State University. What's interesting is the research that he and I did together when I interviewed dozens and dozens of CMOs. I actually asked them that same question. I said, did you have a mentor? 88% of the CMOs I interviewed had a mentor that had a significant impact on their career. And so what I would say is, if you aspire to become a CMO, understanding, having somebody on your side, having somebody cheering from the sidelines, having somebody opening doors and pointing you in the right direction is invaluable. I would suggest it's hard to do without that. So relative to finding a mentor, I would say, I don't know that I'd meet someone and immediately ask them to be your mentor. They might look great on the surface, but they might not be a good match. You might want to get to know them a little bit and build a personal relationship before asking the question. And related to that, I'd say, mentors are important, but role models are important as well. And a role model is somebody that you don't necessarily have intimate relationship with. In fact, they might not even be living anymore, but they're somebody that sets a standard and gives you a target to shoot for. And so I would suggest, yes, have mentors. They're invaluable, but also have role models because they can be helpful too. And frankly, they're a lot more accessible because you can read about them, and now with the advent of artificial intelligence, you can invoke them anytime you want.
And there's role models you can find inside your company, right? And it may not be somebody that is going to be a mentor or take the time to be a mentor. If you're paying attention, you can learn a lot of things that you want to do and a lot of things that you don't want to do based on how others are doing them. And one of the things that we really like to see in people that we're interviewing is we're looking for senior marketing executives is, were you able to learn from someone else's mistakes, or did you have to make all your own? And making sure you understand what not to do is as important as understanding what to do.
Fully agree, 100%.
Cool. So the other thing you said was interesting was there were some things you learned across these interviews of successful CMOs. And what was the Cliff Notes version of, hey, if I interviewed, I forget how many you said, but a large universe of CMOs, what were the top 5 kind of maybe do's, or top 5 things you not to do, or top 5 things you learned within that survey process?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a few that are based on not only that research, but in the subsequent research I've done over the past 20 years. And there are a handful. One, you need to be, if you want to be a leader, you need to be a student of leadership. You touched on it a moment ago. That's learning and observing and making mistakes and having successes all along the way, but understanding and appreciating the impact leadership can have. That starts with self-awareness. I can tell you right now, I'm a fan of the Myers-Briggs personality profile. I know my profile. I know what my strengths are. I know what my weaknesses are. And it informs how I lead and who I surround myself with and what I think I can tackle and what I know I can't tackle. Leadership is number 1, and that self-awareness is the foundation of that. 2, and this was maybe one of the most, becoming a CMO and understanding leadership, that you might have been able to guess that. It's the one that we didn't guess that is really actually had a lot of traction in the research since our, I'll call it groundbreaking publication. The research we published, it was the first time anybody had ever studied marketing leadership in an academic sense. But the idea that came out of that has really shaped my behavior for the past 20 years is this idea that chief marketing officers need to lead up, down, and sideways. So when people think of leadership, they tend to think of leading down, right? Mm-hmm. Recruiting, developing, and leading a world-class team. In the words of Jim Collins, a pocket of greatness. But particularly leadership in the context of the marketing function is, I would argue, a lot more challenging than just leading a team. You need to build, you cannot do your job as a CMO without help and support from your peer executives, right? So you, as a CMO, the research told us this, and my own personal experience has put an exclamation point on it. You will fail as a CMO if you don't have a great relationship with your CFO, if you don't have a great relationship with the sales team, if you don't have a great relationship with your chief operating officer, if you don't have a great relationship with your chief legal officer. I go on and on. Essentially, everyone surrounding you, you need to be successful as a CMO. And I would argue it's a little bit different in other functions, right? So like, I'm not sure a CFO really needs a CMO to do their job, right? They can crunch the numbers. They can go out and get financing without the CMO. The CMO cannot do their job without help from finance. So down, sideways, up. Here's the challenge with marketing. There are plenty. I would say at a high level, marketing has a brand problem. People think they know what marketing is, but people don't really understand marketing, particularly in the age of data analytics and now artificial intelligence. They see an ad during the Super Bowl and they'll rush into your office and say, oh my gosh, I just saw this ad. We got to start doing this. Or our competitor's doing this. We got to start doing this. They're a market sample of one. And listen, there are some really smart people out there who walk into the CMO's office and suggest ideas. But the challenge is because people are exposed to marketing and marketing messages, they think they have an appreciation for marketing that isn't usually as deep as the CMO and others on the marketing team. So my point is, when it comes to the CEO and the board, I would argue that leading up is often a function of educating.
Bill, you said something really interesting in your last answer, which was that CMOs internally have a brand problem. In what we see and what we do, executive search for senior marketers, that's CMO is still the shortest tenure in the C-suite. And it's been that way for 25 plus years. And so when we talk about CMOs having a brand problem, there's some irony in that, right? Internally, as the marketing person. And then the data backs that up because CMOs are not lasting at the same length of time in their position as any other C-suite executive, right? So what do you see as the big disconnect there that leads to that brand problem? And What is your take on why the CMO tenure has been the shortest in the C-suite for so long?
Great question. I'm going to give you a couple of different answers, again, all rooted in data. So the first one is that everyone thinks they're a marketer, whether it's a CMO, a CEO, a COO, the head of sales, because everyone's exposed to marketing, they think they know marketing. Now, I actually still once or twice a year, I write a check. And I had written a few checks over the past few months, and I came home on a Sunday evening and I balanced my checkbook. I was feeling pretty good about myself, right? So on Monday morning, I walked into the CFO's office. I just want to give him a few tips on cash management. That makes sense? Because I did it at home with my checkbook, so I must be pretty good at it. But that never happens, right? But when that same CFO sees an ad on watching the Super Bowl, or his daughter sees a TikTok video and shows it to him, that CFO won't hesitate to come to my office and suggest I go to market in a different way. So number one, everybody's a marketer. Number two, one of the challenges is that it's not often the case that a CEO or board members have marketing experience themselves. Marketing is one of the most underrepresented disciplines on boards. And so what that often translates to is that CMOs don't always get enough authority, enough resources. You can go right down the list. Now, I'm not making excuses for CMO. There are lots of good ones out there and lots of them that should probably find another career. But the fact that there's little experience up the chain makes it a challenge. Accounting is accounting. The FASB and GAAP protocols are in stone. Marketing doesn't really have that same luxury. So that's number two. And then number three, again, all this is backed up by data. There's a researcher, a good friend of mine, Kim Whitler, who is out of the University of Virginia. She's published some research recently on the dearth of marketers on boards. And then more recently, just in the Academy of Marketing Science, Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science in May, it took her 12 years to do this research and get it published, but it's on the role, the CMO role and how it's constructed. And you realize this because you do it for a living, but the way you help clients build the role of a CMO is, in addition to going out and finding great candidates, that upfront work of constructing the role aligned with the culture, aligned with the existing organizational structure, aligned with the strategy is critical work. And candidly, it's just a fact that not every CEO or CHRO has you sitting next to them to provide that expertise. And my point is, the research bears that out, is that the role is often
building the role is really critical. And the other thing that's different, you talk about the difference between finance and marketing, and you're 100% spot on, right? The other thing that's different is there's pretty much one pathway to become the CFO, right? You are gaining experience and moving up along the way as you grow your career. And not to take anything away from CFOs, very talented and very needed within the organization. But as a marketing person, you could have many different foundations to your career, right? You could be a brand person, you could be a digital person, you could be a communications person. And the type of CMO you need is different depending on what the KPIs are and the output is and what the goals are of the organization from a marketing perspective. And very few CEOs and CHROs understand that when hiring a CMO. And so the number of times we come in and get a CMO search because it hasn't worked the last time is about 30% of what we do. And most of the time it hasn't worked last time. Sometimes they made a bad hire, but sometimes they made the wrong hire. And those are two separate things, right? If you just hired the person with the wrong experience and then they didn't work, that's not necessarily a bad hire. You made a bad decision. And as a marketer, right? If you're interviewing and you want to go into this CMO role, how do you know your background aligns with what they're looking for? if the organization may not.